Live from Washington, this is BBC News. In a defiant statement, Iran's supreme leader claims the U.S. did not accomplish anything significant with its strikes on the country's nuclear facilities. But the Trump administration insists that the U.S. strikes did cause severe damage to Iran's nuclear program. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, looks set to cave into Labour rebels and dramatically water down plans for an overhaul of the welfare system. I'm Sumi Somaskanda. It's good to have you with us. President Trump is calling for Democrats to face charges, accusing them, without evidence, of leaking information after the U.S. strikes on Iran. President Trump wrote on his social media platform, quote, "The Democrats are the ones who leaked the information on the perfect flight to the nuclear sites in Iran," adding they should be prosecuted. Now, the president is referring to a preliminary intelligence assessment that was leaked to the press this week. It suggested that the U.S. strikes had set back Iran's nuclear program by only a matter of months. On Thursday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth pushed back strongly, providing new evidence of what he called an historically successful attack. Meanwhile, the White House is reportedly planning to limit intelligence sharing with Congress following that intelligence leak. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
This administration wants to ensure that classified intelligence is not ending up in irresponsible hands, and that people who have the privilege of viewing this top secret classified information are being responsible with it. And unfortunately, clearly, someone who had their hands on this, and it was a very few people, few number of people in our government who saw this report, that person was irresponsible with it, and we need to get to the bottom of it, and we need to strengthen that process to protect our national security and protect the American public.
Republican Congressman Mike Turner sits on the House Armed Services Committee. He spoke to my colleague Katrina Perry and discussed the importance of keeping classified information classified.
You have to understand why this information is classified. It's classified because, this is an ongoing military conflict, an ongoing military issue. The Ayatollah is in hiding because of the fact that this was a military conflict. This information is classified because there are lives at risk, there are lives at stake. This has severe and significant consequences. So as we do these assessments, as we take a look at the issues and try to understand how this affects both policy, this affects both our actions and what actions Israel will be taking, that we'll be taking. These are some of these aspects, even how we learn these answers, are not up for public discussion among journalists as we go in behind closed doors as policymakers and as the Department of Defense, as our intelligence community presents this information for the Department of Defense and the President to receive this information.
U.S. senators received a classified briefing on the Iran strikes. I spoke to Democrat Senator Chris Coons, who's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, what is your assessment of the intelligence after the briefing you received?
Well, Sumi, I can't go into the details of the intelligence that was conveyed to members of Congress, but more than ever, I am reaffirmed in my belief that the intelligence community needs to deliver to Congress a non-political, concrete, thorough assessment of the damage caused by the American strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities. And it is too early for us to reach any definitive conclusion. So when our president says that they were absolutely obliterated, I don't think the intelligence yet supports that. And as more detailed and more thorough analysis is completed and conveyed to Congress, we can then make assessments and decisions about what to do next regarding Iran's dangerous nuclear enrichment program.
I understand, of course, you can't share the details of the intelligence with us, but which questions remain outstanding for you?
So a general question, what, if anything, will other nation states do to assist Iran? There are nuclear states like North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, with which Iran has a close relationship, that may choose to get involved in either transferring technology or nuclear material or even arms. And it's important for us to get an assessment of what, if any, decisions they're making and what, if any, decisions the Iranian regime leadership is making about their path forward. I think the best path for the United States is to continue to pursue and support a ceasefire between Israel and Iran and a negotiation that leads to a thorough and complete end to Iran's nuclear enrichment program that is confirmed by independent inspectors on the ground. Frankly, only then will we be able to say with confidence that we've ended Iran's nuclear enrichment program.
On that point of negotiations, our partners here in the U.S., CBS News, are reporting that the Trump administration is considering options to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. One, for example, would allow Iran to access billions to build a civilian nuclear program, billions from Middle East partners. Another would provide sanctions relief in return for zero enrichment. What do you think of some of these options and angles that the Trump administration might be taking?
Look, that sounds awfully familiar because, frankly, it was the JCPOA that the United States and our core European allies, as well as China and Russia, worked hard together to put in place many years ago. That was a framework that, in exchange for sanctions relief, got inspectors and the removal from Iran of its then enriched stockpile. It sounds to me as if the president and his team are considering a similar offer to Iran at this point. Abandon your nuclear enrichment program in exchange for sanctions relief and investment in economic recovery in Iran. I would support something like that, but would have to see the details. I also think we have a moment here to address Iran's ballistic missile program and its support for proxies in the region. Look, Iran has long been a state sponsor of terrorism, and its support for Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, militias in Iraq have long caused huge difficulties, both threatening Israel and attacking and killing American service members in the region.
Senator, while we have you, I'd like to ask you a question about the big, beautiful bill that is, of course, making its way through the Senate at the moment. This is the president's signature bill, of course, on tax and spending. It seems to have hit a few snags, one specifically, for example, on cuts to Medicaid. Do you think that this bill will actually be finished by the deadline that the president set, which was July 4th?
I don't know, but what's happening is that Republicans, as they have thought hard about the impact this big but not beautiful bill will have on rural hospitals, on access to health care, on their voters and their constituents, many of them are balking at just how deep the cuts are that some Republicans are demanding in order to pay for these massive tax cuts for billionaires and profitable companies. So they're having real difficulty getting the votes they need to clear the threshold here in the Senate. So it's being pushed back by days, if not longer.
Can I ask you, Senator, Republicans are warning that if this doesn't get passed, there will be a tax hike of $3.8 trillion when those tax breaks that were put in place in 2017 expire. What's your response to that?
Well, look, I would certainly join in extending the tax cuts for all who make less than $400,000 a year. But that's a fairly small proportion of the total tax cuts they're seeking to extend. By allowing the tax cuts for the very wealthiest Americans to expire, we generate the revenue that would make it possible to actually reduce the deficit and debt and to provide some of the services like Medicaid for disabled Americans, for senior citizens, for infants, that Republicans are now realizing will really hurt their constituents if they're cut as deeply as is proposed. Earlier today, Sumi, I met with 50 nurses from Delaware who work for every hospital in my home state, and they were united in saying, do not cut Medicaid. It's what helps provide critical, life-saving health care for so many millions of Americans. It would be a very foolish thing for Republicans to do politically and harmful to the American people.
Back to Iran now, and Iran's foreign minister says no nuclear talks are planned with the U.S. That's despite President Trump saying negotiations were set for next week. The supreme leader, in his first public appearance since the U.S. strikes, said the strikes had achieved nothing. He claimed victory over Israel and dismissed the U.S. attack as showmanship by President Trump. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is in the Iranian capital, Tehran. She is being allowed to report there on condition that none of her coverage is used on the BBC's Persian service, which broadcasts to the people of Iran. This law from authorities applies to all international media agencies operating in Iran. Here's her report.
Iran's state TV, the studio where the supreme leader's speeches are aired, but not today. Not after Israel attacked it. forcing the newsreader to flee, her desk devoured by fire. Today, a fiery message of his own from the Ayatollah, said to have sheltered in a bunker during the war.
Iran, with its iron national resolve, rejects surrender. For a country like this, the idea of surrender is laughable to anyone who truly knows the Iranian nation.
For now, a fragile ceasefire. Tehran starts to look like itself. Its infamous traffic, its beautiful bazaars, residents slowly returning to a city they left to escape the bombs. But for some, it's still a battle, just to breathe. In this ward, there are civilians, not soldiers. Murtaza shows us his scars. He was working in the transport department when the entrance to the notorious Evin prison was bombed.
Israel lies, saying they are only hitting military and nuclear sites. They hit a prison. I was there. I was hurt. And I'm amazed countries like England, France, the US and the UN don't condemn Israel.
The abandoned American embassy, a monument to Iran's troubled relationship with the West, accused of sponsoring terrorism, of trying to develop a nuclear bomb. Charges Tehran denies. But even inside this former embassy, a cafe serving iced Americanos. Amir tells me he wants to see a better relationship between America and Iran. So many Iranians do. But in this dark time, there's still not much light. The message in public was defiant, but this blackened studio symbolizes this dark moment in Iran, the most difficult and dangerous decisions confronting the supreme leader, the most fateful choices in his nearly 40 years in power. A new, uncertain chapter in an old, long-standing war. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Tehran.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're with BBC News. The U.S. State Department says it's approved $30 million in funding for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It is the first direct U.S. funding for the GHF, a controversial aid group that's supported by the Americans and Israelis. 6 people were killed while waiting for aid at U.S. Israeli-backed aid sites on Thursday. The United Nations says more than 400 Palestinians have been killed in the past month while seeking aid from both the UN and GHF operations. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, however, denies that deadly incidents have occurred in the immediate vicinity of its aid points. In total on Thursday, Gaza's Hamas-run civil defense agency says Israeli forces killed more than 50 Palestinians. One Israeli airstrike killed 18 people and injured dozens more shopping in a busy market in central Gaza. The Israeli military has yet to comment on that strike. Meanwhile, in Israel, mourners gathered to attend the funeral of 71-year-old Israeli hostage Ofra Kedar. The Israeli military said Sunday it recovered the bodies of 3 hostages, including Mrs. Kedar, in Gaza more than 20 months after they are abducted by Hamas militants. With Israel's ceasefire with Iran holding, focus is moving to a possible Gaza ceasefire. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has more from Jerusalem.
Now, while the ceasefire with Iran is still in place, it is hoped that maybe it could provide momentum to end the war in Gaza, and yet the killings there still go on. Dozens more killed today, according to the local authorities in Gaza, many of them killed at aid distribution points, this very controversial US-Israeli aid mechanism where there are killings and deaths every day. The Trump administration says that a deal could be very close to end the war in Gaza. But even though the regional mediation has been stepped up, we understand, both sides, Israel and Hamas, still have very, very many obstacles between them. Notably, Hamas's demand that a ceasefire could lead to a permanent end to the war in Gaza. That is something that the far right of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet fiercely opposes.
The Kenyan government is condemning deadly unrest across the country as a, quote, failed coup. Kenya's Interior Minister denied that the police used excessive force during Wednesday's protests, describing them as terrorism disguised as dissent. The United Nations says it is deeply concerned by the violence that left more than 10 people dead and hundreds injured. The UN's Human Rights Office called for calm while stressing the right for freedom of expression during the nationwide protests. Most of those killed died from gunshot wounds. Kenya's Independent Police Oversight Authority says it has launched an investigation into the deaths. Now let's bring you some developing political news from the UK. The Prime Minister looks set to cave into Labour rebels over the government's plans for an overhaul of the welfare system. More than 120 Labour MPs signed an amendment calling for the government to scrap its proposed cuts to some disability benefits ahead of a Commons vote next Tuesday. Sir Keir Starmer has agreed to make some concessions. A senior Labour MP, Meg Hillier, says she will now support the bill.
So these are really important changes and shows that how Labour supports the most vulnerable, and also this overall package is about helping people get into work, which is absolutely a core Labour value. I'm going to be backing it now because I think it is a good step forward, and making these major changes are very welcome, and I'm really delighted that the government's been listening.
And our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus is in Westminster and following developments.
Well, what you have here is, on the one hand, the government that had said that it has to reform the welfare system because the benefits bill is just rising too far and too fast and is unsustainable. And on the other side, Labour MPs who were deeply worried and said that the proposal for the cuts to target benefits going to the disabled, those with long-term health conditions, to remove money from some of them, lower the payments and limit the eligibility, that they felt deeply uncomfortable with that and felt it simply didn't accord with the values that a Labour Party should have. And so many of them had signed up to a measure that would have blocked this legislation next week, that the Prime Minister, we know, has been discussing these concessions, this climb down. It would be a really serious one. We haven't had the final confirmation of it, but everything points to this being a major U-turn.
How big of a blow do you think it is for the Prime Minister, Damien, and also what are the Conservatives saying?
Well, so for the Prime Minister, it would be a very serious blow. It would be, I think, the most significant, if it comes to pass, the most significant U-turn of his year in office. He's performed some already, but this is on a really core measure. So there will be issues raised about whether he's a Prime Minister apt to carry out U-turns and his kind of authority and control. Questions about the legislation now. If he concedes on some measures, and it seems likely that what the government will do is say those existing claimants will be protected, it'll be new claimants affected. That means difficult things they have to do to get this legislation redrawn and through, but also difficult questions about the money, because the savings that were crucial to the budget now won't be happening. So they'll have to find those elsewhere.
Now, here in the U.S., a newly assembled group of advisors to the country's public health agency voted to recommend against flu vaccines containing a preservative that anti-vaccine groups claim is not safe. Now, it was one of the first votes by the advisory panel since U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., himself a vaccine skeptic, removed all 17 of its experts and replaced them with 7 of his own selections. That new panel voted 5-1 on Thursday to recommend against flu shots that contained thimerosal. One panelist abstained. Before the vote, the panel heard from Lynn Redwood, former president of an anti-vaccine group founded by Mr. Kennedy. She claimed that thimerosal is toxic, counter to a range of evidence-based studies that prove there's no proven harm from the ingredient. Thimerosal is used in less than 5% of U.S. flu vaccines. The panel did not publicly consider scientific data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And the BBC's U.S. news partner CBS reported on Thursday that Ms. Redwood is tipped to join the CDC and prevention as a special government employee. We can speak now to Dr. Fiona Havers. She was formerly the CDC lead for the Respiratory Virus Hospitalization Surveillance Network. She's currently a staff physician at the Atlanta VA Medical Center and adjunct associate professor at Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Havers, thanks for joining us. Just first of all, on this very specific point of these flu vaccines that were discussed today, why has thimerosal, this element, become an issue, do you think?
Well, I think that what happened today really represents RFK Jr.'s, the Health and Human Services Secretary's, wholesale takeover of the CDC vaccine policy process. And I think that there's been longstanding misinformation spread about thimerosal and vaccines, and it's completely debunked linked to autism. And I think that this has been a focus of RFK Jr. and people like Lynn Redwood, the woman that presented today. So I think it is interesting that the very first time that this new committee that he installed chose to vote on this today, completely bypassing CDC experts, normal CDC procedures for having a vote to change policy, to change CDC recommendations. So it was extremely concerning that this even was brought up today. The way it was handled was appalling. And I was very shocked by what happened today.
So, Dr. Havers, we mentioned that 17 experts had been removed from the vaccine board. There are now 7 on this board. What impact do you think that is going to have?
Well, this vaccine advisory committee is very important because the recommendations, if they become official CDC policy, actually dictate access to vaccines in America, because if it's on the CDC official schedule, insurers are required to pay for it. They took a group of very highly respected, well-vetted outside experts and fired them wholesale without cause and replaced them with people who, frankly, after watching the meetings for the last 2 days, many of whom are not qualified to be on ACIP and weighing in on scientific decisions. What they did today was completely bypassing the normal process, the formal reviews of scientific evidence that normally happens before a vote to change the recommendations occur. And I think it is very concerning that this is one of many, it's the first of probably many moves to restrict access to vaccines that are well known to be safe and effective.
Okay.
And
can I just jump in there?
Medical establishment.
Dr. Havers, can I just jump in there and ask you? Secretary Kennedy has said this is about restoring trust in science. And he pointed to some of the CDC recommendations, or has pointed to in the past, during the pandemic as being a reason of why people have lost trust in science. What is your response to that?
My response to that is that CDC and ACIP, this advisory committee, has established procedures over the last several decades to make sure that the process by which recommendations are made for vaccines in the United States is very evidence-based and transparent. By firing all of the experts, first of all, there's just many issues with that, but then replacing them with people who are not properly vetted, and then bypassing all of the normal procedures by which evidence is transparently reviewed, graded formally, and then experts from multiple different groups are allowed to weigh in. They bypass all of that. And I think that it is very clear that even though he uses words like restoring trust and evidence-based science, it is clear that they are not interested in that at all. They're not following the proper procedures that would actually allow that process to happen. And they opened the meeting yesterday by talking about how they were the chair discussed how they were going to revisit the childhood immunization schedule for the United States. And I think that that's very concerning, that they may be moving to potentially restrict access and limit insurance coverage for other safe and effective vaccines that have been around for a long time.
Dr. Havers, we just have about a minute left, but you actually resigned from the CDC. Can you tell us why?
I resigned a job that I loved and that I really wanted to keep to protest RFK Jr.'s wholesale interference into the CDC's vaccine policy process, because what he's doing is destroying confidence in vaccines and is also now pulling levers of government power to restrict Americans' access to vaccines and limiting insurance coverage of safe and effective products. And as a physician, I am worried that more people are going to that more Americans are going to die directly as a result of RFK Jr.'s interference in this process. And for my own personal integrity, I could not be part of legitimizing this committee that is going to be moving forward to do that.
Okay, Dr. Havers, thank you so much for joining us on BBC News today, for sharing your expertise and perspective with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that is our program here on BBC News. Thank you so much for watching. And don't forget, you can stay up to date on the very latest on our website, bbc.com/news. We have the latest headlines and analysis there from our correspondents around the world. We will be back here with an update on your headlines at the top of the hour. Stay with us.
BBC News' Johnny Diamond chairs a diverse panel fielding questions from a passionate audience in Kuala Lumpur as they critique their own laws on freedom of speech. World Questions.
From Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, this is the BBC World Service. This multi-ethnic, multiracial nation has gone from rural poverty to urban affluence in 2 generations. It trades with China and the US, but as they clash, which way will it turn? This Southeast Asian nation is divided into east and west by the South China Sea. It's an heir to immigration from India and China and beyond. And it's a country where Islam is dominant, but freedom of worship is guaranteed by the constitution. Modernity has come at a rush to Malaysia, but growth has brought many questions. How to distribute the riches more equally, how to govern without the stain of corruption, and how to navigate the clash of the great powers, China and the US. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has said of Malaysia, we have to emerge as a mature democracy. But as of now, there are still some subjects which are judged too sensitive for us to address directly in open debate. But we have an audience who have freely offered challenging questions on the issues and a panel very ready to address them. Our panel. Senator Dr. Fuzia Salah is Secretary General of the Prime Minister's PKR party and Deputy Minister for Trade. Dr. Tricia Yeo is Associate Professor of Practice at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia's School of Politics and International Relations. Wan Ahmed is a member of the National Assembly, a former Minister for National Unity, and the opposition's spokesman on foreign affairs. Our final guest is Vilashini Somya, head of the Gender Studies programme at the University of Malaysia. She is an anthropologist, long specialising in the lives of marginalised people in East Malaysia, where she comes from. Your panel. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to our first question, and it comes from Noor. Good evening.
Good evening, Nurul Najah, but I put here Noor. Okay, yeah. My question is, as we can observe now, most bosses in Malaysian media corporations are men. Where are the women? Is it because we're too emotional? Men get emotional too, so what are your thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm delighted to say the Director of News at the BBC is a woman, although the Director General is a man. 14% of seats in Parliament here in Malaysia are held by women, and women have a much lower workforce participation rate. Vilashini Somya, Head of Gender Studies.
That was targeted.
Yeah, it was. I'm sorry.
You could have started there. You had to go straight to a woman. Thanks so much for that question, Noor. I mean, I was waiting for it. Fair enough. I mean, this obviously is the conversation we have all the time, right? Where are the women, right? I also understand what the reality is. The reality is you got to go home, cook for your husband, cook for your wife, press his pimples out, right? Go and do, your second job, your second hustle on your online job and so on and so forth. And the triple burden of living just consumes you. And this is why we can't get 30% in, which, by the way, is a number that I hate. Personally, I hate.
So 30% in Parliament?
30% in Parliament, 30% anywhere. The moment you put that number, it's going to be a problem, because it also means to say my 100% is equivalent to your 30% participation.
Would you like to see sort of formal policies like affirmative action?
Of course.
You would like to see that?
Of course I would like to see that.
Thank you. I am going to come to the audience on this. I warn you now. I'm going to go to the lone man on our panel, Wan Ahmed. What are your thoughts? Where are the women?
Well, if you were to notice, the numbers of female students studying in higher educations in Malaysia are outnumbering the male. Maybe the opportunities in certain sectors are quite limited, especially politics. Some of the reason they gave, especially in rural areas or in conservative area, if you feel woman candidate, the chances of winning might be lower than the male candidates. So this must be corrected. With what? Education. Education to the masses, that women and female and male politicians or assemblymen or assemblywomen in that matter are equal in their abilities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hold on, Johnny. I really need
I'm
to
going
butt in.
to go to the other members of the panel first, Virginie.
Okay.
I just really.
Just let the other members.
I'll let you get away with this
first.
for 5 seconds, okay?
I promise I will come back to you, okay? I promise. Trisha.
So I think that there are extremely high barriers for women to enter politics. The political culture is really not something that, in Malaysia specifically, that women can actually endear themselves to. The politicians, the real conversations and the real meetings happen at night, when the women are supposed to be home taking care of the children and cooking and taking care of the home. The cost of politics is very high. Campaigning costs are very high. And of course, this one goes without saying across the board, not just in politics, but also the support system. Malaysia is amongst the lowest returning rates of women to work. So we have a high rate in the 20s, but once women have children and you have a home to take care of, they don't come back to work. I'm very proud to say that I have a strong support system. So thank you to my husband, who's somewhere here, and my family, to allow me to do the work that I'm doing and to be here tonight to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we thank your husband too. Thank you very much. Senator Fuzia Saleh, you have ascended to a relatively high position in the political system, despite all the obstacles. Can you talk about that and about how difficult it has been?
I must say that it has been very difficult. And a woman has got to be twice as good as men, to be acknowledged even as good. The glass ceiling does exist. It's not easy. And politics is the most difficult. Because like Tricia said, campaigning is difficult. You have to lobby, you have to sit down in coffee shops, you have to raise the funds. You have to have a very good support system, and I'm also very thankful. My husband and my family has always been very supportive. In fact, he's the one who propelled me forward. There are times when I feel like giving up. And when I started, the women were happy making tea during meetings. They were happy taking charge of committees like food and drinks and decorations for events, and we changed all of that. And we have over the years, especially now in my position, we have brought some affirmative action. Recently, during the Congress, we achieved 42% of women delegates.
Thank you very much. Virginie has been jigging up and down in her chair, shaking her head. You wanted to add a little.
No, I didn't mean any disrespect. I just want to say this. I understand Trisha and Senator coming in here and really, making it important to point out the places in which men have supported them. But herein lies the problem for me. We constantly go back to this celebratory language for this very minimal participation of men. We constantly we amplify the places, and I'm sorry, men, we over-amplify the places in which you do this much. What you need to be is an ally. What you need to understand is that if you're talking about equality, it's literally that. And so it's not about, thank you very much, men, for doing this amount. It is, come on, men, you can do more. That's the position I want to take. Sorry,
right,
yeah.
I'm going to take it to you. Okay. Lots of passion here. I want to hear, if I could, from the audience. Noor, can I start with you? You asked the question.
I've been working with the PR consultancy before this. I work a lot with a lot of media conglomerates, media corporations. A lot of bosses are all men. So I'm like, wow, where's the woman? But I hope in 10 years, 20 years to come, this can be changed.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you very much. From other members of the audience, that point, if you could, would you like to see formal change? I see a lady dressed in white, just here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Tamina. I am a woman in media. I feel we need policies that positively state that men need to be involved in raising families, that men also need to be the ones to step up so that we not only encourage the men already doing this, we also acknowledge single fathers, but we also acknowledge fathers who are partners in equitable home partnerships.
Thank you very much. Other thoughts on this? I see lady in the front row there.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi,
and welcome.
my name is Sulin. I'm the editor-in-chief of Code Blue, which is a health news website. And frankly, I'm just disgusted with a lot of women in politics right now. I mean, no offense to YB Fuizia Saleh, I don't really follow your personal politics.
Nothing
so
personal.
nothing on you. It's just that across party lines, whether government parties or opposition parties, women behave exactly like men. You don't do the right thing. Everything you do is just to chase positions of power, and for what? Because you don't care about the people at all. So that's why I feel like there's no point in trying to have affirmative action to get more women in politics if you're going to behave exactly like men.
Thank you very much, madam. And sir, thank you. And after him, lady in blue. Sir.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the one Ahmad Faisal's statement saying that women, there are more female students than male students in the university, because I teach at the university. It is true. So the reality is that when we have more women graduated from the university and then they go into the workforce, etc., they are paid lower than their male counterpart, and that makes them feel disinterested to pursue working and decided to choose being a housewife and etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Lady just there, if you would.
I'm Hasween, and I tend to agree with the lady in front of me just now. I'm also in media. I have my own show. My head of current affairs and news is also a woman, very powerful. So I don't think that it's a problem about getting women into the workforce. And I feel that with affirmative action policies, it actually reduces our talents because it feels like we need a lifeline to get ahead. So I'd rather merit all the way.
Thank you very much indeed.
Let's do it.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next question. It comes from Roshini.
My name is Roshini Mukaya, and I have a question in regards to Malaysian identity. This is something that I personally have been struggling with. My question is, how do you reconcile the ideals of Malaysia being a diverse, democratic, secular country versus the reality of Malaysia versus Malaysia's status quo prioritizing Malay Muslim hegemony? Thank you.
Thank you, Roshini. And we will come back to you after we've spoken to the panel on this. I should say this is one of the few states in the world where the special position of an ethnic group is named in the constitution and where rights and privileges are entrenched in law for that group, often referred to as the Bumi Putera, forgive me, also translated as the sons of the soil. Vidashini Somya.
Oh, so I get to start this first.
Yeah, you can start this one. Go on.
That's great.
I'm sure you've got one or two thoughts.
Put the minority on the spot first, why don't you?
A low blow. Go on.
Roshini, thank you for that question. I think it's safe to say that I'm the only person on this panel who is like you, a biracial, maybe more than biracial person, that is often sort of phrased as an in-between person, right? And I get it. My concern with the way in which we constantly talk about identity in this country boils down to a very important national word, tolerance. I've heard this word since I was a child. There's this thing, tolerate, tolerancy, we call it in Malaysia. And I have a huge problem with that. I tell my students this all the time. Would you tell your girlfriend, I tolerate you? You won't, right? And I think therein lies the problem for me. And I say this as a person who has an Indian father, an indigenous mother, who was born in Sabah, who is a woman, who lives her life as plus size, right? And I think that there is a lot to be said about this because I constantly have to mask and try to fit in something that is in a sphere above me in order to survive this country. So I think, on a global level, we want to talk about identity as a way where it's celebratory. There's a kind of a happiness about reclaiming your agency and your identity, but that's easier said than done. And I think if there's a way for us to sort of mitigate that without constantly feeling so afraid of, injuring the feeling of those who are in power, members of the status quo, it would be an easier conversation.
Okay. Let me go to the Minister of Trade.
I will start by saying that more than 10 years ago, the Prime Minister, the President of my party, introduced one policy, which is called needs-based policy rather than race-based policies. And it is a process to make people understand that it is not their right just because they belong to a certain group of people, but it's because they need. So if a Malay gets a 10% discount on buying properties, what about the Indians who are poor? Why does the Malay who have higher earnings enjoy the same benefits? So it takes, we need to reorientate the thinking.
Thank you. I spoke in the introduction to the programme about some sensitivities, and it is the case that debate on what are called the 3 Rs here, and that is the royal family, race and religion, is extremely limited if it exists at all. We are treading on very sensitive ground. I understand that. I respect that as well. But we obviously want to have a free and open discussion around the question that Roshini has asked. Trissa Yeo.
Let's address it, right? Article 153 in the Federal Constitution provides for the special position. So I think a lot of people, including policymakers, by the way, get confused about what the term actually says. So it is special position. It is not special privileges. I think that Malaysians have lived too long under the shadow of 13 May 1969. And we have not, 13 May 1969 were racial riots. So my point is that let's have some kind of a truth and reconciliation commission, the likes of what South Africa did after apartheid, because we need to close that chapter finally.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I apologise if I'm hurrying our panel along a little bit. We are short of time and with lots of questions. Wan Ahmed.
Yeah. Malaysia was not born or was not forged in a vacuum. Malaysia was a nation state that was given birth during post-colonial era of decolonization of the British Empire. And prior to that, Malaysia was ruled by the Malay Islamic sultanates.
Do you reject Roshini's phrase, Malay Muslim hegemony?
I would reconfigure the word hegemony. I would rather use custodianship. Why? Because, yes, custodianship means you are the majority race. Your role is to ensure peace and harmony of the nation. Meaning it's a burden, it's a responsibility rather than a privilege. And also as a Muslim leader, we were not taught to be tolerant. In Islam, we were taught to understand this phrase called muhibbah, which means in Arabic, love. Love thy neighbor.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to go back to our questioner. Thank you.
First of all, thank you everyone for your kind remarks. Let it be known that you're talking about muhibbah, love, and yet in the previous general election, according to the social media monitoring report by CIJ, Center for Independent Journalism, PAS, one of your own political partners, was one of the biggest amplifiers for ethno-religious hate. So I hope that you are able to bring some of those comments back to your party.
Are you?
Yes, I shall leave you there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wan Ahmed, very briefly, if you would.
You see,
Thank you, Roshini.
Thank you. Definitely, there are weaknesses among my party members, my coalition members, when it comes to race and religious rhetorics. But why single out PAS when we all know very well DAP also play the same rhetorics?
Okay.
Just that they are not being reported.
Please, this is the Chinese majority party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Clearly strong passions on this issue, as so many others. Let's move on. Thank you. We have Our next question is from Vilasini Vijandran.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, everyone. Vilasini Vijandran. My question is, how can we ensure that rights to freedom of expression and assembly are safeguarded for young people and that their voices are not stifled by political pressures and restrictive laws?
Thank you very much indeed. It should be said the colonial era left from the British colonists, the Sedition Act, is cited as a very significant restriction on freedom of speech here in Malaysia, restricting criticism of government figures, the government and other figures throughout society. Can I start, if I may, with the Senator? The question, how can you ensure rights to freedom of expression and assembly? I believe the Prime Minister said he would repeal the Sedition Act.
I was just commenting that it feels like me against the rest of the...
Not at all. Wan Ahmed got a terrible time to do it just a moment ago.
I was in the opposition. I knew what it's like. I meant what I said, what we say with regards to freedom of expression. Yeah, I think the reforms may not be going as fast and as what we want it to be. However, there are little steps. And I hope those little steps, like there's a working group on the media law reform that has submitted their findings and their suggestions to the ministry, to Azalina. I don't think it is moving fast enough. However, the manifesto from each parties are not necessarily the same.
You are in a coalition government.
We are in a coalition government. It's the first time Malaysia entered into a coalition government. And reflecting on what we should have done, I think one of the best practice is to learn from the German. When they formed the Grand Coalition in 2017, they took 5 months actually to form a blueprint where they listed all the policies. On hindsight, and I think if it is something that we should have done.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Vilasini Somya.
The way I see it is that young people are greatly influenced by things that are happening on a global scale. You know, they get most of their education from TikTok, not university, right? And there is, of course, this new way of understanding the world in which if you don't reclaim and you don't seek your own agency and you don't stand up for what you believe in, then you're going to be buried in the rubble of, all kinds of, post-colonial issues. So this kind of decolonizing approach in wanting to reclaim what is important to them is necessary. And I'm for it. I understand why there is a need for it. So you can't talk about being the ideal person you want to be if you can't secure a job. And you can't talk about securing a job if you can't also talk about not just your gender and your race, but certainly, and I need to put this out there, your sexuality, your gender, right? What if you're a trans person in this country, for example? And I think, I have to agree with Trisha, is that we have not created enough of this concept of safe spaces.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Wan Ahmed.
I would characterize this government as a government with iron fist in a velvet glove. Stop giving excuses about slow reforms because we are we are in unity government. The fact of the matter is, the Prime Minister is the most powerful person that could affect change that he wants. But does he make the change that he promised to the people? No, nada.
Would you like to see the Sedition Act repealed?
Definitely, it can be amended to accept the new realities and challenges, to have more freedom and also spaces for people to discuss things that are deemed sensitive.
Professor, thank you.
There's a whole slate of archaic legislations that really need to go. The Printing Presses and Publications Act, which restrict media from operating freely. The Sedition Act, which has very, very vague clauses, which means, therefore, that anything can be captured by the Sedition Act.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to hear from the audience, if I could. But first of all, if I could, from our questioner, Vilasini.
Hi, and thank you all again for your responses. I think for me personally, why I feel freedom of expression is so important, especially in our country, is because it underpins our rights and access to all other rights, right? And when we talk about freedom of expression, and specifically the targeting of youth activists and student protests, what we are really doing is sending a very chilling message to say that we are stifling dissent.
Madam, in the front here.
And in Malaysia, we have many controversial issues that are very sensitive. And we are not allowed to talk about it publicly. We have racial sensitivity and especially religious sensitivity. I would love to have a discussion with a Malay Muslim about his religion and my religion. I mean, we just have a talk, you know. But that is not allowed because the laws in the country say proselytizing. You know, if we can't talk about things that's sensitive, if we have to keep quiet and just tolerate the situation, it's never going to be solved in the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your thoughts. And from our audience, we have to say farewell. I'm afraid that is it for World Questions Malaysia. On behalf of my producer, Charlie Taylor, the BBC World Service, and in particularly from me, a huge thank you to our panel. You have been brilliant. You have been patient. You have given us your time and your experience. Thank you. Thank you also to our questioners. Fantastic questions. To a brilliant audience here in Kuala Lumpur, and of course everyone listening around the world. I'm Johnny Diamond. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
I think the first signs that I wanted to be a journalist were when, as a kid, I started making pretend reports in my back garden. I always liked asking a lot of questions. But as I grew up, I wanted to be part of trying to explain why things happen. I've had a lot of different jobs in journalism. What I've learned is that it's always about the people that are at the heart of these stories, how they're affected. The wildfires was a story I was living through myself.
It is really hard to comprehend how life is ever going to get back to normal here.
Overwhelming for so many people in the city, and it was affecting everyone's day-to-day lives. And I was going to bed at night not really knowing what I was going to wake up to the next day. The fires were burning right around us, so we were having to take split-second decisions about how to gather pictures and tell this story.
There's helicopters flying just above us, just dropping water now, trying to keep those flames at bay.
It was tearing through everything. I knew thousands of people were leaving their homes and were probably never going to get to go back to them. And in the middle of that chaos, I had to find ways to talk to people about what they were experiencing.
That was my house.
It's all gone. I think hearing one person's story helps viewers trust what they're hearing. Because when you can empathise with one person's experience, it helps you get an understanding of the bigger picture.
Live from Washington, this is BBC News. In a defiant statement, Iran's supreme leader claims the U.S. did not accomplish anything significant with its strikes on the country's nuclear facilities. But the Trump administration insists that the U.S. strikes did cause severe damage to Iran's nuclear program. Plus, a major U-turn for British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer as he waters down plans for an overhaul of the welfare system. I'm Sumi Somaskanda. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is calling for Democrats to face charges, accusing them, without evidence, of leaking information after the U.S. strikes on Iran. President Trump wrote on his social media platform, "The Democrats are the ones who leaked the information on the perfect flight to the nuclear sites in Iran," adding, "They should be prosecuted." The president is referencing a preliminary intelligence assessment that was leaked to the press this week. It suggested that U.S. strikes had set back Iran's nuclear program by only a matter of months. On Thursday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth pushed back strongly, providing new evidence of what he called an historically successful attack. Our correspondent John Donison has the latest.
Well, at this briefing from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, this morning, we got a lot of detail. It was a long briefing, a lot of detail about what the attack at the weekend involved, but not a lot of detail about the results of that attack. So what we know is that America dropped these huge bunker-busting bombs onto 3 sites. Much of the effort was focused on the Fordo complex. We know that those bombs hit exactly where the Americans wanted them to. We know that they tunneled deep into the ground and detonated. But what we don't know is the impact that that had. We don't know if the